were taught to care, to listen, to give people second chances, to believe that if someone hurt you, it was probably a misunderstanding. You were taught to lead with empathy, and that's beautiful. But it's also exactly what some people are counting on. Because the more you feel for others, the easier it is for them to control you, without ever raising their voice. This is how manipulation evolves in silence. We think abuse has to be loud, obvious, violent. But some of the most damaging people you'll ever meet will never raise a hand. They'll just plant an idea that sounds like, "You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. You always make things about you." They don't make you bleed, they make you doubt. And that's the most dangerous kind of wound, because it doesn't leave bruises, it leaves questions. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But if you're constantly made to feel like your emotions are too much, you'll never accept yourself. You'll edit yourself. You'll shrink to stay loved. And manipulators know that. They can see it from a mile away. The way you flinch when someone's disappointed. How fast you say sorry, even when you didn't do anything. How you explain and re-explain and twist yourself into someone easier to love. Not because you're weak, but because empathy was your survival strategy. It made people like you. It kept the peace. It helped you make sense of chaos when you were too young to name it. But now, that same empathy is being turned against you. Every time you give them the benefit of the doubt, they take another piece of your clarity. Every time you excuse their behavior, they push a little further. And eventually, you don't recognize yourself. You become the person always fixing, calming, smoothing, saving. But who's doing that for you? The answer is no one. Because manipulators don't pick strong boundaries. They pick open hearts with no fences. People like you. This video, this entire series, isn't here to turn you cold. It's here to show you how powerful your empathy is and how easily it can be stolen when you don't know your own worth. You'll learn the tactics they use: guilt as a leash, gaslighting as erasure, obligation as control, silence as punishment, vulnerability as a trap. You'll learn how to spot the patterns, not just in them, but in you. Because healing doesn't just come from knowing their playbook. It comes from rewriting yours. They don't take your power by force. They get you to give it to them. And the tool they use isn't rage, it's guilt. It starts small. They say they're disappointed in you. They remind you how much they've done for you. They talk about loyalty, about sacrifice, about how they would have never done this to you. You don't want to hurt them. You don't want to be like the others. So you bend, you give in, you make the call, send the apology, cancel your boundary, not because it feels right, but because it would feel worse to upset them. And they know that. They've studied you. They've watched how fast you jump to fix things. They've tested how far they can stretch you before you snap. And every time you stretch without snapping, you teach them that your empathy is negotiable. This isn't kindness. It's a transaction. You give, they collect. Carl Jung believed that what we repress eventually controls us. But they don't need to repress you. They just need to convince you to do it for them. They create a loop. 1. Make you feel bad for standing up for yourself. 2. Reward you when you back down. 3. Make you doubt your memory when you question the dynamic. 4. Reframe their control as love, concern, or just being honest. You don't notice it at first, because they don't come in like a villain. They come in like a mirror, reflecting your own softness back at you, then using it to reshape you. You might say, but they're just insecure. They're hurting too. They don't mean to manipulate me. Maybe, but intention isn't the point. Impact is. And the impact is that you feel smaller, more confused, less you. And here's the most brutal part. The more empathic you are, the easier it is for you to justify their behavior. Because you don't just feel your pain, you feel theirs. So you carry both, and in doing so, you disappear. This isn't about vilifying people. It's about protecting the part of you that's always been the first to be sacrificed. Your empathy is not the problem. Your lack of boundaries is. And until you see that guilt is a tool, not a truth, you'll stay in relationships that drain you while convincing yourself you're being compassionate. You're not cold for walking away. You're not selfish for saying no. You're not cruel for protecting your peace. You're just someone who finally realized empathy isn't supposed to hurt. Not all manipulation is verbal. Some of the most effective tactics don't come from what they say, but from what they don't say. They sigh instead of argue. They disappear instead of confront. They look disappointed, not angry. And you react anyway. You rush to apologize, to explain, to fix the energy in the room, even though no one told you to. Why? Because the control was never about direct force. It was about emotional atmosphere. Carl Jung said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, love is lacking." When you walk on eggshells around someone who hasn't said a word, that's not love, that's power. Silent control is manipulation in its most efficient form. It doesn't confront you, it conditions you to overthink, to blame yourself, to adjust your behavior before they even have to ask. They withhold affection just long enough. They delay a reply just enough. They look at you just slightly differently, and suddenly your mind goes into overdrive. Did I do something wrong? Are they mad at me? What if I ruined everything? But that spiral isn't random, it's learned. Because at some point, you realize that emotional distance was their version of punishment. They don't yell, they retreat. And when they come back, if they come back, you feel like you earned their warmth again. That's not love, that's conditioning. And the longer it continues, the more your nervous system starts doing their work for them. You anticipate their disappointment. You tone yourself down to avoid discomfort. You suppress your needs before they're even expressed. This is how empathy becomes a prison. When you internalize someone else's silence as your shame, they might never raise their voice, but somehow you always leave feeling smaller. Because what they withhold is just as powerful as what they offer. They withhold certainty, so you stay anxious. They withhold clarity, so you keep guessing. They withhold warmth, so you overcompensate. They withhold validation, so you overperform. It's not loud, it's not explosive, but it's exhausting. You start editing yourself constantly, not to connect, but to avoid tension. You're no longer choosing empathy, you're surviving through it. And when you live in survival mode long enough, you forget what it feels like to be safe in your own skin. The cruelest thing about silent control, it's invisible to everyone else. So when you finally speak up, they call you dramatic, too sensitive, hard to please, and you wonder if maybe they're right, but they're not. What you're feeling is real, and what they're doing is working, because it's designed to make you question yourself before you ever question them. That's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to stop it. And in the next part, we're going to break that silence. We'll name the tactics they hide behind soft tones and calm faces, because you deserve more than a relationship that only feels safe when you're silent. If this feels familiar, if you've lived this quiet tension and doubted yourself more than anyone ever doubted you, then you're not just watching this, you're in it. Click subscribe, not just to follow a channel, but to finally start following yourself. No more over-explaining, no more shrinking, no more paying for someone else's silence with your peace. Let this be the moment you stop just feeling everything and start understanding it. We've got more to uncover. You're not alone in this. Real connection is mutual. Real care is offered, not owed. But when you're dealing with someone manipulative, that line gets blurred, fast. Suddenly, everything they do for you comes with an invisible price tag. They comfort you, then remind you of it when you need space. They listen to your problems, then bring it up later to guilt you for saying no. They support you, but only so they can say, "After everything I've done for you." This isn't kindness. This is emotional credit. And you're the one paying interest. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And one of the easiest ways to avoid their own shadow is to keep you so focused on your guilt, you never have time to notice their games. They don't ask for power. They get you to offer it. Through gratitude, through emotional debt, through unspoken rules you didn't agree to, but follow anyway. You start hearing thoughts in your head like, "They were there for me. I shouldn't make a big deal out of this. They're going through a lot. I should be more patient. Maybe I owe them another chance." But ask yourself, if you constantly feel like you owe someone love, attention, forgiveness, is it still real? Manipulators don't want you to feel free. They want you to feel indebted. Because someone who feels free can walk away, but someone who feels guilty, they'll stay, they'll explain, they'll overgive, over-apologize, and over-function until their own needs become an afterthought. And it doesn't end there. Once they know guilt works, they upgrade the tactic. Now, they don't even have to say anything. You anticipate the guilt. You walk on edge. You overthink every word, every tone, every decision, not because you're unsure, but because you've been trained to avoid disappointing them. That's not love. That's obligation disguised as care. And it makes you forget one very simple truth. Love is not alone. You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they once held you when you cried. What matters isn't what they did for you. It's why they did it. Was it to support you or to gain leverage? Empathy is a gift. It becomes a prison when someone uses your compassion as a currency you never agreed to trade. At first it feels small. You let something slide. You silence a reaction. You tell yourself, it's not worth the fight. But then it happens again and again, and somewhere along the way, you stop recognizing yourself, not all at once, but piece by piece. You laugh less. You speak less. You start to measure your words before every sentence. You feel nervous before expressing basic needs. And here's the thing. No one told you to change. No one asked you to become invisible. They didn't have to. Because when you're deeply empathic, you don't need direct orders. You adjust to the energy. You absorb the unspoken. You anticipate disappointment before it's expressed. And that's how you disappear. Carl Jung warned about this. He said the greatest danger is not the darkness around us, but the parts of ourselves we abandon in order to survive it. You didn't lose yourself because you were weak. You lost yourself because you thought that was the only way to be loved, and they never stopped you. In fact, they benefited from it, because when you forget who you are, you're easier to mold, easier to manage, easier to manipulate. They liked you more when you were softer, smaller, quieter. They called it easier to be around. But what they really meant was, you stopped challenging them. And that's the final stage of empathy being weaponized. You don't just give up your boundaries. You give up your identity. You start calling it compromise. You start calling it maturity. But deep down, it's submission, not out of weakness, but out of exhaustion. You're tired of arguing, tired of being misunderstood, tired of being told you're too much. So you start to believe it. You start to say it to yourself. You start to make their voice your inner voice. That's not healing. That's self-abandonment with a pretty name. But here's the truth. You don't need to become less to be loved. You don't need to censor your heart to be accepted. You don't need to pay for someone else's comfort with your silence. The people who truly see you will never make you feel like you're too much. They'll never need you to disappear to feel safe. You were not born to be digestible. You were born to be whole. You didn't choose to be used. You chose to be kind. And that's where they found you. Because manipulators don't look for cruel people. They look for compassionate ones, for givers, for empaths, for people like you, people who feel deeply and question themselves even deeper. And that's what makes the wound worse. Because when they hurt you, you don't get angry, you get confused. Did I expect too much? Was I not patient enough? Maybe it's my fault. And that loop is exactly what keeps you stuck. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So let's make it conscious. Let's name what they never said. Let's call out what you've been trained to normalize. Guilt isn't love. Silence isn't peace. Obligation isn't connection. Shrinking isn't compromise. And self-erasure isn't maturity. You were taught that empathy means putting others first. But true empathy includes you. It honors your limits. It respects your number. It stands beside you when someone crosses a line, not against you. Because if your empathy always comes at your own expense, then it's not empathy anymore. It's self-neglect in disguise. So what do you do now? You return to the parts of yourself that learned to stay quiet, to the voice you silenced just to keep the peace, to the body that tensed up every time you felt guilt for protecting it. You go back and say, "I see you now. I'm sorry I left. I'm here." Not for revenge, not to become cold, but to become clear. You're not here to play small. You're not here to carry someone else's emotional chaos. You're not here to be the emotional punching bag for people too afraid to meet their own shadow. You are here to be whole. So how do you stop them from weaponizing your empathy? You stop handing it over for free. You stop explaining your worth. You stop translating your soul into something easier to digest. You build boundaries. You sit with your guilt until it loses power. You stand in your no like it's holy, because it is. And you remember this: the right people will never require you to disappear to stay. And the wrong people, let them go. Let them misunderstand you. Let them call you selfish, cold, distant. You're not those things. You're finally safe with yourself. That's not coldness. That's warmth turned inward. That's empathy reclaimed. So if you've been feeling drained, like you're giving everything and receiving less and less in return, maybe it's time you stop being so available to people who only show up when they need to feed off your light, and instead, turn that light inward. It's your time now, not to rescue anyone, but to rescue yourself, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away.